Welcome to Fractal Focus, the podcast where innovation meets entrepreneurship. And in this episode, we have Austin Belcak, who is the founder of Cultivated Culture. Austin, tell us a bit about you and a bit about Cultivated Culture.
Sure thing, Phil. Well, thank you for having me, first and foremost. Very excited to be here, especially given the body of work that we've created together. Yeah. So thank you for that. So Cultivated Culture is a company that's focused on essentially teaching people how to be more effective job seekers and being able to take control of their careers and doing it via, a predictable and systematic way that works in today's market. So I started this 8 years ago or so. I kind of lose track. It's kind of like when you get older, you forget, what age you're turning at the next birthday. It's kind of the same thing here, but I think it's 8 years. And it was really born out of my own job search experience. I graduated from college with a biology degree. I had pretty bad grades. I was working in healthcare and I wanted to work in tech. And I eventually wanted to start my own business. So I had to go through the process of transitioning industries, and it was pretty grueling. It was very nebulous, and there wasn't a lot of clear advice out there. So when I eventually got into tech, I ended up at Microsoft. I worked there for 5 years, was promoted 3 times. I realized that a lot of people didn't understand the process or have the resources readily available to them online. So I started this business while I was working at Microsoft. I built it up. Eventually left in October of 2020 to pursue this full time, and just been building it ever since. So it's been fun. I've gotten to experience the job seeking side as well as being a founder, and kind of merging those two things together and helping some people along the way.
That is an amazing story. And we're going to get into the Microsoft while finding Cultivated Culture later in the podcast. But I really think one of the barriers to entry has always been how to even enter. And no one is going to lay out a path for you, really. Right? I think that's just across the board, almost in many industries. It's there's not a, hey, here's the path how to get here. Ironically, though, people want good talent. So it is kind of like a tango or like a dance, if you will, I think, in thinking about hiring versus looking for work. So Fractal Focus is focused, as you're now discovering, Austin, about founders and people that are just starting up companies. And part of the process, of course, is getting a team together. And that could be one of the it is the most essential thing that a founder can do, is find the right people to fit into the right tasking, into the right position for their company. So as a founder, and with your experience, your vast experience in the world of hiring and the world of resourcing, what do you think is the formula for finding that winning team that a founder can use to make sure they have the winning team?
For sure. And I think, for some context, but I guess I didn't share in the intro, but it's nice because I've had to kind of grow through the stages. I'm not a founder with a team of, 30, 50, 100 plus people, but for the early stage folks, I've gone from trying to do everything myself to waiting a bit too long to hire, to then hiring and scaling up a team of, now we have 5 folks in addition to myself who are working on our business. And so I've kind of been through that whole process, and we're completely bootstrapped as well. So we've had to be really intentional with the hires we make and when we make them. And a bad hire would, it sets you back significantly. It doesn't matter what stage of business you're in. So I would say, to your point, you mentioned earlier that you kind of want the people who are going to go above and beyond and figure out those different avenues and kind of show you what they bring to the table. And I think on the company side, on the employer side, it's sort of our job to facilitate that. And I don't think the traditional hiring process does that well. But it's really easy to, I think anybody listening to this who runs their own company can relate to the fact that when you want to invest in a new channel, whether it's hiring somebody, whether it's a marketing channel, anything else, oftentimes if you just go grab something off the shelf and you kind of say, well, everybody else is doing it this way on the surface, and you try to implement that, it usually doesn't work out that well. And we really have to dig into the weeds of what we want and build something around that. So that is really what we've done. I can go into more detail about all of this, and maybe Phil, you can kind of point me in the directions of where you think might be most helpful for the audience. But for us, we really almost created like a bespoke hiring process. It still included many of the steps that you'd see, right? We had an application, we had rounds of interviews, but each of those was done a little bit differently than you might see in a traditional hiring process. Granted, we had the benefit, we have a pretty large audience of folks in, our newsletter and on LinkedIn, and across the board. Our combined network there is, I think we're closing in on like 1.7 million people or something like that. So we have that pool to draw from, which is a unique position to be in. But if you have a place to source talent, whether it's LinkedIn, Indeed, whatever, then it's sort of up to you or us as founders to build out the rest of the funnel so that the talent has the opportunity to showcase, those traits and those skills that we're really looking for versus, the traditional process of here's, apply with your resume. We review all the resumes. We bring people in that we think are great. So much just gets lost on that 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So I'm happy to go into detail on any part of that, but you let me know which area would be most helpful.
I think for any of the people that are listening to this, I think the thing that they may find the most helpful, and this is going to be interesting that the way I'm thinking through this, because everybody has a process for everything they do, right? Whether it is, planning out the business plan for the company, whether it's how to find funding, whether it is creating a process to deliver product. But when it comes to hiring, for some reason, people don't stick to process all the time, if that makes sense, especially in the early stage. There's a lot of gut checks. There's a lot of gut feelings. I have a gut feeling about this person. And that could be out of a fear of not being able to pay market rate. That's another factor too. Can you even be competitive on the market for the salary for this person? So there's a myriad of different imposter syndrome, I think, type things that founders maybe run into. And I don't know if you ran into that. So I imagine maybe diving into that a little bit in that psychology, and then we can go into a little bit of process, and also for time's sake for the podcast, would love to talk about, job seekers and what they can do also to be in winning teams. But I think on the founder side, what have you found in your hiring process and in building your team has been the most psychologically successful way to approach it?
Yeah, so it really, there's definitely a lot of thoughts and feelings that are associated with it. But I think the biggest thing on my side it was trying to just ask for what I want. I think a lot of job descriptions and, founders, when they hire, we use kind of this weird, job description language and this weird way of describing things. Whereas on our side, we just wrote job descriptions based off of what we need. So we would have a section, our job descriptions would start with a little bit about the company. And then we would have a section that kind of mapped through what a day would look like or what a week would look like. So we talked about the specific actions that people would be taking. We included like volume as well. So, if you're going to be doing X task, you're going to be doing it at this volume. And we included expectations, like here are the outcomes. And then we had a section for who would be a good fit for the role, as well as who wouldn't be a good fit for the role. And the last thing we add to all of our job descriptions is an outline of the timeline for the hiring process. And that was so helpful because I think one of the traps that we fall into with the traditional setup is when you put a job description out there, especially in traditional job description language, you're going to get a million applications, and many of them are not going to be relevant simply because it can be really hard to understand what a role really is doing from the job description. And the solve for that is to just explain what the role is doing in plain English. And what we've seen is job seekers have really resonated with that. If they can show up and read sort of as if they were having a conversation with somebody over a coffee about what the role is going to be like. It's so much easier for people to say, this is a role I want, or this is not a role for me. So right off the bat, just speaking in plain English, writing, in paragraphs versus just a list of bullets, focusing more on actions and outcomes and those expectations rather than number of years of experience or those more traditional qualifications. That out of the box made it a lot easier for the right people to apply, which made our job easier reviewing those resumes. And in addition, I think it attracted more people to us because I think they saw that we were taking a little bit more of a human approach to the process right from the get-go. So that was the first thing that we did. Then the second piece, we had the application, but the application had some questions in it, and they were pretty basic, but they would kind of get to the root of the role itself. And so we would ask people, why do you want to work here? Obviously, but we would ask them to kind of describe a success that they'd seen or experience that they had with the exact outcome that we were trying to create. And then we had some, a free form question, just asking them what was the coolest thing you've done or built over the last 6 to 12 months. And so these weren't long applications. We also asked for a resume and a LinkedIn. These weren't long applications, but what that allowed us to do was, one, see the investment that people had off the bat, right? When you have more of those free form questions, you can see who's really putting thought into them and who is not. And again, that makes it really easy for you or your team to just completely eliminate the 90% of resumes that aren't going to be a good fit. But we also found that when we gave people the space to, going back to the point you made earlier, when we gave people the space to express themselves in their own way, on their own terms, we got a lot of really interesting applicants rather, whose experience we might not have seen on their resume. I would look at their resume and not see the kind of the magic that I saw in those answers. So that was really helpful, both from an efficiency standpoint, eliminating people who weren't a good fit. Also very helpful in identifying the right people to bring in the door. And then once they were in the door, our process was pretty straightforward. We had an interview with me, we'd have an assessment, and then we had an interview with somebody on the team that they would be working on. It's basically a 3-step process. The 2 interviews are pretty standard, and the assessment was essentially, it was a paid assessment where we would pay these people at the hourly rate that they would get paid if they landed the role, essentially. So we would look at their salary and back it into an hourly rate. It's my belief that people shouldn't really be doing that work for free. And a lot of our candidates appreciated that, but it also meant that they put more into the assessments. So our process was heavily driven towards you being able to do the work and proving that, rather than us having to assume your capabilities based off of what you wrote in a resume, or based off of where you've worked before, or based off of things that happened in the past that were more nebulous. And that created a lot more confidence on our side in making the right hire. I think it also created more confidence on the candidate sides for, it being more of a meritocracy in terms of who can do this job right now, versus resting on, previous experience or laurels. And then I would say that the last thing that we implemented, more recently, was a scorecard. So we built out, I think it's like a 20 to 25 point scorecard for candidates that covers all the things that we want. So capability, cultural fit, et cetera, et cetera. And every single one of the people in the hiring process fills it out, but they fill it out independently of one another. And then at the end, we come together and we compare the scores. And that really helps with a lot of the psychological, biases or gaps or flaws, because when you have multiple people doing this on their own and you bring the scores together, one, it's really tangible, right? You can see, my score was X, your score was Y. What are the differences there? And we can see where we overlap. We can see where there are differences. And you can also just objectively see who's the best fit, because to your point, a lot of it's gut feeling, right? You get to the end of the process and you're like, well, Phil really gave me good vibes here, but Austin really gave me good vibes here. And it's just like vibes, right? Which is kind of not the best way to make a really important decision. So that scorecard has been a game changer for us as well. So that's kind of a quick overview of our process. I don't know if that fully answers the psychology question, but those are the things that we found to be most helpful in going through this.
Well, I definitely think this helps. I hope this helps founders appreciate the importance of a few things. One, the infusion of culture and communicating the company culture through the hiring process, which I think what you're doing is great at that, because typically a candidate would need to ask questions to elicit responses about the company culture and about how they work. And so in the hiring process, when you're taking action, for example, paying someone the hourly rate when doing an assessment, when you're changing the job description to include human elements that are more human readable, you're communicating without being too obvious your company's culture. And I think that's really good advice for any founder when they're getting their company together. How do you want it to live and breathe? Because Austin, I don't know if you agree with this, but I think the biggest and most fascinating, I don't want to call it hypocritical nature of companies. I guess that might be too dangerous. I might get in trouble for this, but I always think that mission and values for some companies maybe is something they just write on paper and then go on a completely different tangent or don't even think about it all the time and don't fully infuse that into all of their processes. And I think that's very true in hiring, because there seems to be companies that give off this warmth and this, we're a B Corp or we're kind of this kind of company. But then when you get to the hiring process, it's just the same traditional, here's job description. No, we can't give you the feedback as to why you didn't make the cut, that type of thing. And also, again, to your point, if you're not hiring with the sense of getting not only objective feedback, but also human feedback, also finding that candidate, you might hire a toxic candidate without even realizing it because there's too many blind spots, because you haven't addressed company culture, you haven't addressed the mission and values of the company, you haven't addressed what you're doing day to day. And I think that for founders, based on what you just fed me, that is a really good framework for a founder to work off of when they're actually doing the hiring process.
Yeah, and you mentioned the salary piece before, and we're a small company. We pay competitively, but we're not going to be able to pay the same as a venture-backed firm or a Fortune 500 or whatever.
Right.
And I think that the good news for people in our position is that those larger companies are that traditional system is just so ingrained, but it's also so at odds with what most candidates want. If we just put ourselves in the shoes of a candidate, or even what we would want for ourselves, like, would we want a job description that's written in all this like weird, funky language that felt really abstract? Or would you just want somebody to explain, like, here's why we're hiring, here are the goals, here is how we're measuring those goals. If you beat those goals, here's what will happen. And like, do you want somebody to explain it to you that way? And same on the culture side, especially with everything going on in today's climate, return to office, et cetera, just giving people the freedom to work from where they want, or giving people, one of the things that we list in our job descriptions is kind of this set of values, but the values aren't, we're on a mission to help 10,000 people get these types of jobs by X amount of, X time. A lot of companies, they have the aspirational visionary values, but somebody who is learning about your company for the first time, they're not bought into the point where that matters to them yet. I mean, certainly if somebody wants a job in, sustainability and your company that's a big value, like that match is going to be there. But by and large, I think people have like levels. It's almost like, Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like they want to make sure, like, before I get the match on these other things, like, am I going to be treated like a human? Am I going to be able to work from the places I want to work from? Am I going to get paid fairly? Like, which of those needs are going to be met? And so if you can show people that you're happy to be flexible on those fronts, because maybe you can't be as competitive on the salary side or whatever it is, we found that people are really, really receptive to that. And we've actually been able to make some really awesome hires, really smart, awesome people who probably, could have made more money elsewhere, but they saw the value in, the way that we approach work. And I think because the way corporations are approaching work today, it's really, really easy to make an attractive environment as a founder that honestly doesn't really cost you anything or bring, any negative impacts to your company.
I think that is absolutely part of the winning formula to get a team together that will work. Because without a doubt, if you decided that you had such a large budget and you could pay this, high market value for people, you're almost not going to get genuine responses maybe during the process, and you're not going to get everybody's full attention, because while Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of course, being able to feed yourself and being able to shelter yourself is very important. At the same time, people don't want to do those things in misery. People don't want to do those things while feeling compliant to a system or to a thing that they don't truly believe in. And I think that's really important. There's a few, we don't want to get into it.
For sure,
a few people that definitely don't mind doing that. But I think, especially for founders of startups, it is so important to build the value of why people want to join your company, because it is still a nascent thing and it is still a growing thing. And to get the right people that will grow it with you would require some different ways of thinking around hiring. And I think that's what you're bringing to the table with Cultivated Culture is fantastic in that regard, but also hearing your story about how you've built your team is just awesome. A segue into job seeking. So we've talked about founders and, and we danced around it a bit. I mean, if we had 3 hours, we could probably just give the whole solution for free to a bunch of founders, but eventually you might want to monetize that. But going into job seeking, what is the best way for someone that is either changing careers out of university study, out of high school study, out of vocational study? What is the one narrative that can get any one of those candidates noticed by a company in any stage?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the same set of principles, which is just clear communication around what the other party is looking for. And so, on the hiring side, which we just talked about, candidates they just want transparency on what they're signing up for, what the expectations are, what the work environment's going to be, what the work environment will look like. On the flip side, employers just honestly really want to know, like, are you going to be able to achieve the goals that I have set out for this role? And in doing that, are you going to be able to add, a positive ROI to my company? And that's really it at the end of the day, right? Obviously, there's a lot of nuance that goes into that. But I think, again, the traditional process doesn't create a great bridge to clarity around that. We can look at somebody's resume and see, oh, you had this GPA, but we also know that GPA doesn't always translate to success in the workplace. We can look at somebody's past experience and see that they've worked at X, Y, and Z places. And sometimes, to your point, we can feel, whoa, this person, we've had people apply to our company from, Fortune 500 places. And my first thought is, why are you applying to my company if you worked at like this place before? So to your point about that imposter syndrome and the psychology, but on the flip side, we can miss out on a lot of great candidates because maybe their resume doesn't show, certain things. And so as a candidate, and a job seeker, we need to take control of that narrative. And I think for me, the best way that I found to do this is really two things. One is networking. People will tell you that till the cows come home, but really it is true. And the formula isn't complicated. It's pretty straightforward. If it were me, I would just start tomorrow and I would begin reaching out to one person every single day. And in that outreach, I would try to offer value or position myself as like a somebody who's worth investing in. And then I would work to build those relationships up over time. Now, a lot of people are under more pressure with their job search, and there's different strategies for networking faster in those cases. But the best long-term strategy is to just make networking a habit that you do if you're out of a job, if you're in a job, if the job is great, if the job is bad, if it's raining, if it's sunny, if it's hot. It's like, it doesn't matter. Just every single day, you're reaching out or you're touching base or you're just continuing to grow that network, because it's been true since the beginning of hiring, but people want to hire other folks that they know, that they like, that they trust. The data really backs up the fact that referrals are the best hiring source for companies. So we want to play into that. But the second thing that goes along with that is the illustration of value. And it's really hard to illustrate your value to its full potential in a resume, in a cover letter, especially given it would be, even if you could hand that resume directly to the CEO of the company, it's still a really poor medium for conveying value, especially for certain types of roles, right? An engineer, a designer, those fields don't lend themselves well to being described on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of black and white paper,
Yeah.
So the best thing, in my opinion, is to go out there and find more tangible ways to illustrate your value. We kind of call this like the portfolio strategy, but basically my recommendation is to go find a couple of companies that you want to work for in your target field and do some research on them. See if you can identify an opportunity, a challenge, an initiative, something that is important to them. And then you basically treat it as your own consulting project. You do more research on that challenge, that goal, whatever it is. You brainstorm some ideas and you kind of map out the execution for them. And then you lay it all out in a public place. Could be a podcast, could be a YouTube video, it could be a blog post, a LinkedIn post, something where anybody in the world can see it. And the beautiful part about that is, that shows employers exactly what they're looking for, especially if you do this intentionally and the companies you're focused on with this are in the same industry, maybe even competitors to the companies where you're going to eventually land jobs. It's just such a direct illustration of value. So one example, we have our clients do these types of things all the time. And it's helped them land some amazing jobs. But, a couple of different examples off the top of my head. We had one person who wanted to land a job at Microsoft, and they were coming out of school. They were a recent grad. This was for a rotational marketing program, and there were, I think, 2,300 other applicants. So rather than just putting in an application, they went and they did the networking, and they got some ideas around what this program would be focused on. And they then went and did their own research. And this was back a couple of years ago, but this was basically pre-COVID, when Teams was not quite as big as it is now, and it was all Slack all the time. And so she identified that was a big opportunity, right? Slack was the line in the market. Microsoft, Teams is sitting on everybody's PC, but nobody's using it. And so she brainstormed a couple of different ideas and ways for Teams to capture more market share, leveraging, the existing ecosystem. And she led with that, and that eventually got her the job offer. Another one that I love is, I don't know if you know Away Luggage at all, but they make, they're like the Warby Parker of luggage is what they brand themselves as. But okay. One of our clients came up with an idea for them where, their whole thing is about the experience, right? We all hear like Starbucks isn't selling coffee, they're selling the experience, blah, blah, blah. Same with Away. And so the idea that she came up with was, what if you had a pop-up lounge in JFK, and instead of showing your Amex Platinum card, you got into the lounge with your Away suitcase, but the lounge was like, beautiful and well-designed and free drinks and fast Wi-Fi and like, how, and then you have people going by and saying, well, how do I get in there? And it's, oh, you have to go buy an Away suitcase. So these types of things, if they're tailored to the role that you're looking for, that's the type of stuff you'd be asked to do if you got hired. And so when that is the value that you're illustrating, it's just so clear to a hiring manager. You can look and see, okay, we're hiring for a brand marketing manager. Do I hire the person who has told me about all the things they've done in the past, or do I hire the person who took the time to think about this really cool idea of a lounge at an airport, and oh, by the way, also has experience in this field in the past as well? So we always recommend going out there and doing that stuff because it's going to create visibility. It's a really clear path to adding value. It's also just going to make you better at what you do because you're going to be getting reps and you're going to be practicing as you go. So I would say those two things, if you can allocate, 30 minutes a day to networking and 30 minutes a day to chipping away at one of those projects, you'd be surprised at the progress that you can make in just a couple of months.
That is amazing advice. I think on the software engineering side of the world, one of the things that I've looked for in a resume is a link to their GitHub. Mm-hmm. And I want to see reps on GitHub, for example. So to your point about portfolio pieces, whether they have a fully formed portfolio, to me, that wasn't important. What was important was, are they actively working in their skill? Mm-hmm. Are they actively working towards the thing that they want to come on board for? So that's one of the first things I look at. Even before I look at the actual resume, I'll look at the link. Mm-hmm. And I say, okay, what have they been doing? And that demonstrates, again, I think this is a really nice yin and yang dance partner kind of thing where both the hiring manager or the person on the team in charge of hiring and the prospective employee are kind of doing this dance of bringing their passions to the table, bringing their initiatives to the table. From the founder, it's communicating culture, it's communicating why you should be part of this group. And from the employee, it's demonstrating their value. This is why it can help your company grow. And I think that's pretty, I don't want to use this code word, but it's very synergistic, right? It's very like, that's typically a very, it's a very corporate word, but occasionally it comes in handy. And I think in this case it does, because it does allow for a really meaningful, not only the founder finding their person that's non-toxic, that will help the company grow, but in the job seeker, finding a place where they can continue to grow their skill set, where they continue to develop their professional life. And that, I think, becomes a beautiful thing. So that's a great place to wrap. I do want you to get some time to mention Cultivated Culture. And of course, we're patting our backs a little bit because one of the Fractal group of companies is FYC Labs, who helped you develop the website, I believe, and also the tools. But if you can speak for a moment on Cultivated Culture, what its resources are for job seekers that are just entering the space.
Yeah, so I mean, I should have mentioned this in the intro probably, so I don't know how worthwhile it is at the end. But our scope in terms of the brand that we have, we were bootstrapped. We started with nothing. We built our way up to multi 7-figure company plus. The audience that I mentioned of closing in on like 1.7 million people, and a big part of that growth, especially on the audience side, which then feeds into the revenue side, was the work that we've done together at FYC, like you mentioned. And that work was really some product-led growth. We put together a lot of tools that job seekers needed or wanted, and we put them out there, and initially we offered them for free, and then we started monetizing them. But those tools they're the number one email subscriber generator for us. Those email subscribers go on to then go through our value ladder and build up. And so that's really been the big part that FYC has helped us with, is building out those tools and leveraging them to create our audience. And so all of them, you can check all of them out at cultivatedculture.com. We have a whole free tools tab in the navigation there, so anybody can give them a look. And then outside of that, that's pretty much the deal that you all have helped us with. So we're tremendously grateful. And thank you, Phil.
No, thank me. Thank you. Thank each other. Right. It's been a great relationship. And to speak further about Cultivated Culture, there's so many resources on that site. There's tools, there's coaching, there's courses, success stories. I would recommend, if you're looking for a job in this space, to go there today. It is cultivatedculture.com. Cannot recommend it enough. Austin, what a pleasure it was to talk to you today. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And we're an early podcast, so as we continue to grow, I think there's kind of a relevant thing in how we found you as a guest, right? We're early on in this process, and we're trying to find the right guest for the show to help develop it and to develop its personality. And I think bringing you on is demonstrative of bringing on really good people that really want to do good in the space and that want to help, and also at the same time grow companies and be prolific in that way. So you're the perfect guest to continue to grow this journey with us. Really appreciate it. And for anybody else that has been listening, remember, Fractal Group Podcast, we are going to be doing it weekly. Please listen, please learn, please continue to progress. And with that being said, good luck, continue to grow. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Fractal Focus. We hope you found valuable insights. If you enjoyed the conversation and want to stay updated on the latest trends and expert advice, make sure you subscribe and leave a review. Your support helps us continue bringing you the content that drives your business forward. Until next time, keep innovating and stay ahead of the curve.